Welcome to Ning Institute, to the Dharma Talk series. My name's Erica, and I'm really thrilled, always lovely to be here. I've been an instructor at the Institute for, wow, about 25 years. Lately, it's been mostly Dharma Talks and occasional workshops, but I first came here when I was a graduate student back in 1989. Is when I walked in the doors of Ning Institute. And so for those of you who are new, this institute has been here since the early 1970s. Tartang Dolku Rinpoche founded this. It was one of the first meditation centers with Tibetan Buddhism in the United States, in North America. And over the years really evolved into a learning center. And one of the things I always appreciated about this place is how I think this is still true. I always felt it was kind of like an onion in that there are all these layers of depth. So there are these public facing things, the meditation, the talks. There's also very practical meditation classes or skillful means. And then there's also really deeply detailed, I don't know if there currently is, but used to be Tibetan language classes. Yeah, there is. Right. So there's if you stay and you start peeling back the layers of the onion, there's all kinds of depth. So if you're new to this environment, welcome, and I hope you enjoy what you're seeing here today. So I'm going to, I'm coming through. Am I loud enough to everybody there? Are you picking me up? Yes, good. I don't know, I guess there's a boom mic
Right up for you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the mic.
Yeah.
Cool. That's a cool mic. So let me just give you some of you know this, but if you don't, my background is, I was a student and then an instructor here. My background is, I have a PhD in psychology, and not as a therapist, but as a scientist, an academic, and a scholar. I study human emotion, facial expression. I also have done a lot of research on meditation and compassion in particular. And I've been teaching meditation here, and through various contexts, I helped develop a compassion training program at Stanford University years ago that was very designed to kind of take all this wisdom from Tibetan Buddhism, along with a lot of stuff we know from psychology, Western science, and put it together into this training program to help people become more compassionate. And it's been a lovely thing, and it's something that's made a big difference in the lives of a lot of people. So when I come to this material, I'm wearing all those hats. I'm going to be talking about some concepts from Buddhism, but I'm not a Buddhist scholar, although I've been a practitioner for many years, and I've been in these contexts. So I've been exposed to and participated in a lot of traditional practices and rituals. And hi, thank you for coming. And also I've been at this from a more secular level, how to bring this to everybody, whether you're Buddhist or not, and from psychology and science. So you may hear me talk about research or this or that while we're talking about the Brahmaviharas. And the topic today is the Four Immeasurables and cultivating the Four Immeasurables. I think I said cultivating the Four Immeasurables for good, the good for all, good for you, and good for yourself. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to me. It's something I got exposed to early in my education, and I've come back to over the years, over and over again, partly because I've worked so intensively with one of the Brahmaviharas, compassion, and also they're very much interrelated. So you'll see as we go through this discussion how there are these four different qualities that we talk about, but they all are very much related. So thinking about sharing this material with you, and I'm sure many of you, it depends on your background, have been exposed to some of this before. I'd like to start with the sentiment behind all this. I think one of the sentiment behind working on these qualities, these Brahmaviharas, and I'll explain that term in a minute, is what if we could all be happy and fulfilled and get along? That's the bottom line. It's about cultivating our own happiness, reaching the highest levels of attainment of that, and may it be there for everybody, and may we treat each other kindly. Ultimately, that's the sentiment behind this work when you're cultivating the Four Immeasurables. And there's a lot of formality about what they are, but I think that really helps in terms of accessibility. That's what we're going for here. May we all be happy and flourish and free from suffering and get along. That's a big piece of it. So starting with this word, Brahmavihara, it's a Sanskrit word, Brahma, and Brahma here is not the Hindu god Brahma. It's referring to the notion of a boundless, elevated state of being, like this divine state of being. And Vihara means abiding. So the Brahmaviharas are these ways to abide in this divine state of being. Think of it that way. They're also called boundless qualities or immeasurable qualities. And what we mean by that is they cannot, there's no end to them. They can constantly grow. You don't run out of it. So there's, common notions like compassion burnout or compassion fatigue that are actually misnomers, because you don't really ever get exhausted from compassion. It's the things that can happen when you're working with compassion, like being overwhelmed by suffering and getting stuck in your emotional reaction to that, which is a very real problem that can lead to feeling like you're worn out from it. But when you're in the state of compassion, really embodying the quality of compassion, that itself is actually invigorating and not exhausting, and it never runs out. I have a great quote here from Thich Nhat Hanh. He said, if you practice these qualities, and just to name them, I'm going to name them now, and then I'm going to go over each one in turn. And if we have time, we might visit a little practice together as well. But there are four. These are the four boundless qualities, the Brahmaviharas, or the four immeasurables. That's sort of how I learned them, as the four immeasurables. They are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic or empathetic joy. And I'll define all these things, because loving kindness and compassion might seem more intuitive. Sympathetic joy might, what does that mean? We'll break that down. And equanimity. And it's interesting, there does seem to be an order to them. Maybe in how you work with them, because in some sense, most lists will have equanimity last, and equanimity is almost the most nuanced of the Brahmaviharas, and it kind of makes sense that you kind of got to get through the others. But when you're working with these, you're kind of working all of them at the same time with a specific focus on certain practices for each one. The Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, who many of you probably know, talks about the Brahmaviharas as four elements of true love. And what I like about that is, they are all manifestations of a boundless loving heart. So they're different specific manifestations of that. So I like it that he linked them all together that way. And he said they're called immeasurable because if you practice them, they will grow every day until they embrace the whole wide world. You will become happier, and those around you will become happier too. And it's interesting to think of those around you becoming happier by your practice. But if you think about it, we don't exist in a void. We exist in relation to others. So how we treat others is how we feel, how we cultivate happiness. If we're working with compassion and kindness towards others, it's going to have an effect on them, because we don't exist in our own little bubbles, even though it feels like we do sometimes in this world. We're all connected. So, all right, so let's, and there's one other thing. I was looking at Longchenpa. Those of you associated with Nyingma Institute know we talk about the 14th century Tibetan master. Longchenpa has had all kinds of amazing things to say. And when he talks about the Four Immeasurables, this is actually a translation that Tartang Tolku did of Now That I Come to Die. This is a beautiful book, Dharma Publishing. I think it must be Dharma Publishing if Rinpoche did it. But rather than four immeasurables, they're referred to here as the four immeasurably great catalysts of being. It's that kind of flowery language that we find in a lot of Tibetan Buddhism. And these are ultimately related to, promoting well-being, success, serenity, thoughtfulness of others, and ultimately they're about love. So they're great. And the other thing about the Four Immeasurables, they are seen as qualities of being that can be cultivated and practiced to counteract certain destructive states of being. And we will talk shortly when we go through the list of each of these about near and far enemies. Near enemies are states that look like it, but they aren't quite it, you know. And far enemies are like the opposite. So if you can think of something like loving kindness, the far enemy is cruelty. And sometimes people talk about anger as a far enemy of, not cruelty, hatred is a far enemy of loving kindness. Cruelty is a far enemy of compassion. But along the lines of these far enemies, so they're like opposite states, destructive opposite states. And when I heard of this notion of them being antidotes, so loving kindness is an antidote to hatred, meaning you can, if let's say there's somebody in your life for whom there's like a lot of, you might think you hate them, or you feel a lot of anger towards them, like really intense anger towards them. If you bring them into your practice and you start practicing with loving kindness for them, which means wishing that they be happy and well and that they flourish and that they have all the good things they need, which feels like, wow, that's a hard thing to do. So that's a challenge for somebody we have that relationship with. And that's why when we're doing the practices, we take baby steps. We start with someone we actually already love. And then we also work with ourselves, which for some people can be challenging, right? And then we move on to someone we don't know, like a stranger, but that's a little bit less potent than the person where you feel a lot of anger or they treated you unjustly. And you work to cultivate loving kindness for them. What you'll find is you cannot sustain anger in the face of love. That doesn't mean we don't get angry at people we love. This is different. That's like relational context. I'm talking about in the moment. It's like fire and water. The love, if you keep throwing love at somebody, you can't also at the same time hate them. Does that make sense intuitively, I hope? Yeah? That doesn't mean you can't, that's not to dismiss. As I'm saying this, I can hear, wait, but sometimes we get really angry at people we love. I'm not talking about that relational context, I'm talking about in that moment. And so this idea of these being antidotes, and I remember when I first learned about these when I was a young woman in graduate school in psychology, and I said, oh, these are like magic potions. You know, we could have, oh, I'm just gonna put a little loving kindness on that. And I'm going to tell you that it works. And I'm going to give you a personal story in a minute. But I want to make sure, are any questions on what I've covered so far? Is it clear? Does it look clear? Okay. So I want to take these each in turn. So let's continue with loving kindness. And some of you might have heard the Pali. Pali is one of the early languages of Buddhism that's still used a lot in Southeast Asia and the Theravada traditions. The Pali word for loving kindness is metta. Sanskrit is maitri, right? So you might have heard of metta practice as loving kindness practice. And loving kindness is really the unconditional wish for others to be, for someone, others or yourself, to be happy and to flourish and to blossom. Like, may you be all you could possibly be. It's gorgeous and it's loving and it's beautiful and it's full of positive emotion. So I mentioned far enemies, the opposite, right? And that far enemy of loving kindness is hatred. What about near enemies? Near enemies are the things that can masquerade as the state we're aiming for. So, and we can sometimes get caught, they're usually more superficial, and we can get caught in them and mistaken. So for something like metta, loving kindness, it's like a sugary sentimentality. Oh, like this light wanting to love everything, but when it really comes down to it, it's only on this surface level. So it's not about sustaining this sugary sentimentality. It's about deeply wishing that this other person flourish and be happy, or that you yourself flourish and be happy. They're not the same thing. And actually, there's been a significant, and I'm going to wear the scientist hat now, meta practice, loving kindness practice typically involves, you know, stabilizing the mind, like a lot of these, just doing some basic breath meditation as preparation. This is important because you have to know how to kind of create a workspace, stabilize the mind. Before you want to start doing specific things with your mind, you want to settle it and have worked with that kind of settling the mind, learning how to focus it, and developing this quality that that kind of basic shamatha practice does, which is it will help you cultivate a metacognitive awareness, which is an awareness of what your mind's doing. So you got to have done some practice of knowing how to stabilize the mind and navigate your way around it. That's important, especially if you have to have discernment, a discerning mind, in order to notice if you're falling into the near enemy. Are you falling into the sugary sentimentality, or are you really working with something here that's truly wishing this for the other person? So you stabilize, settle, and then you bring to mind someone you want to work with. Usually these practices involve a meditation with a visualized or imagined target, and you see them, feel in relation to them, and then wish for them to be happy. You send them, you use phrases like, may you be happy, may you flourish, may you have everything that you want in life, may you be well, may you be safe. There's usually statements like that that you're repeating in your mind, usually not aloud, but they're recited. And then usually releasing the statements and sitting and being present with that individual. So you're really trying to imagine they're there with you and you're wishing these things for them. And doing this once is just an exercise. But if you do it a lot, like anything, when you're trying to change how you feel about anything, it takes practice. So if you do it a lot, it's going to start reinforcing. And this is where I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to bring my scientist hat. We learn things by repeating a habit. We make things a habit by repeating it and doing it over and over again. And that actually reinforces the neural connections underlying those kinds of thoughts. You are training your mind and brain to feel this way about that person. That doesn't mean the other stuff might not come up again, if there was hatred there. But you're training yourself to feel nice over and over and over again. And we know from research that when people do metta practice just generally, it makes them happier. Just doing loving kindness practice will increase your happiness. You can also use it to start softening your relation to a difficult individual. And I'm just going to share a personal story here. Years and years ago, I was a young scientist, and I was working on a project, and I was in a group. It was at a university, and I'll just not get into any of the details, although I did write a published blog about it once where there were a little more details. But I'm still just going to say, I was working with both loving kindness and compassion in this practice I ended up doing later. But in this real life situation, it was a work situation in which I had been, if something difficult came on, I had been what I thought and then later was shown to be scapegoated as the cause of the problem. And I was asked to leave the project. It was devastating to me. Devastating, because I helped create the whole thing. And then after I was asked to leave, I was also told that they wanted me to stay an extra 3 weeks to finish up what I was working on. When every bone, every cell in my body wanted to bolt, I just wanted to get out. And so I reached out to my teacher. I don't know how many of you here know Sylvia Gretchen. She was my teacher. And I said, what do I do? And she told me, because I had less power here, she goes, you're never going to write this wrong. She goes, do loving kindness and compassion for this person, these people. Because I didn't want to abandon the project because I still cared about it. So I figured I'd stick it out for 3 weeks. And I remember driving to work, sitting there, doing, may you be well, taking this main person who was the one who, and every day on my cushion, driving to work every day. And then after a week of doing this every day for a long time, I started just feeling better about being there. So right away, it's interesting. So this is a compassion and loving kindness practice. It was both. I was doing both for this person who I was angry at. And it was helpful to me. It made me less angry. So it was for them, but that's why I think all these practices are always for you as well as for whoever you're practicing for. So I felt a lot better, and that made it easier for me to be in the work environment. And the punchline to this story is by the end of 3 weeks, they asked me to stay. I didn't, and that was good. This is because it was like, no, it was not a good work environment, but it changed everything. It was so transformative. It totally shifted my orientation. It made me, I was able to abide in it with all the mess and complication, and I was saved by the practice. So anyway, that's my little personal story, and it was compelling to me. It was the first time in my life and I was a scientist too. It's not like I thought anything magical or mystical was happening. I was training my mind to think this way, and it made me happier, and it made me treat everybody else around me differently. And they wanted me around. So I left anyway, as I said. So do you have a question?
I do have
Jill?
a question. So what do you think of the incremental change that will occur? You're describing a situation where just the thinking or the verbalization through the repetition had benefit. And what I have experienced in various conflict situations is that, like the way you described, first settling the mind and through breathing. And then I've encountered a need for some tolerance, understanding. In other words, sometimes I'm not quite sure how to get from point A to the point B. Do I just start repeating and practicing on a regular basis, and these other intermediary steps will fall into place?
Well, I'm not sure which immediate intermediary steps you're talking about.
Well, as you described, that settling the mind.
Yeah, right.
Once you have confronted something that has been very destabilizing, emotionally, psychologically, and you identify, as you did, that there really was an underlying cause, and you were victimized to an extent. So I'm just wondering how the mind, as you're training the mind, do you go from a place of coping or just a place of calming? My mind is saying, how do I get from this to that? Do I just make that leap of faith? Do the practice?
There was a leap of faith for me. Absolutely. There are two things I want to address here. The leap of faith, I'll say that first, but then I also want to address the calming part, because I want to clarify something that might not have been clear. So the leap of faith was, I didn't know what to do. I reached out to my teacher, and she made the very important point that I wasn't going to right the wrong, no matter what, because there was a huge power differential. There was nothing I was going to do that was going to fix that. So all I could do was change how I related to the situation, and that's really important. I mean, it's true. This is a fact. 95% of what happens in the world we have no control over, but we can control how we respond to it. Right. And so instead of seeing how I was wronged and just servicing that, putting my brain in that all the time, could I put the water on the fire and say, you realize that this is another, just like me, this person wants to be happy and get through. This is the compassion speaking. They're just trying to get through life without too much pain and difficulty, just like me, and leave the specifics of this aside and wish them well. And I was very much doing it for selfish reasons. I am not going to lie, because I knew that would make me feel better. It was coping. And it was also creating in me a habit of regarding them differently, which is beneficial to them. It's just good. So all of that right there. And to say about the calming and stuff, the point I was making about that is something that needs to be practiced regularly. So it's like, in this other book I was going to share about all the Brahmaviharas. This is called Boundless Heart by Alan Wallace, Cultivation of the Four Immeasurables. It's been re-released as the Four Immeasurables. It's the same exact thing. If you put Four Immeasurables and Alan Wallace into your search engine, you'll find this. I've used this for years. It's got a gajillion, it really goes through each one of them systematically. But he starts the book with shamatha practice. You have to stabilize, which is basic breath, stabilizing the mind and learning how to focus it. That is a precondition for working with these other things. It's like you got to prepare the workspace to do this other stuff. If you dive into a busy mind that you have no ability to navigate with these complicated practices, it's going to possibly be a mess, you know. So basic breath, whether you're stabilizing and noticing the breath, one of the simplest and also one of the most profound meditations there is, doing that, or you're doing it without a focus and just abiding in the space of mind, but you're still just cultivating awareness, and then also maybe working with some mindfulness practice to notice detail and where your mind goes and what it does. You can develop this quality that I called metacognitive awareness, which is awareness of the mind and seeing what you do, knowing your habits, knowing your tendencies. That has an ability to slow things down, to take the things that are automatic, to move you from a place of being reactive to more responsive, less wound up. So all of that is like preparing the soil for these kinds of practices. So I want to get to the other three, but that was a very important question. So it was a shout out to loving kindness practice, and that one I also did some compassion practice as well. I'm going to get to compassion now, because people sometimes confuse loving kindness and compassion. Loving kindness is this, may you be happy, may you flourish, may you blossom. Compassion is a little different. And now I want to read page 128 of this book. This is the Alan Wallace book I was telling you about. I've read it. You see how well marked it is? It's got little sticky things on it. Oh, you can see that. Okay. And, okay, listen to this. The difference between loving kindness and compassion is very simple and straightforward. Loving kindness, in a sense, is dealing with potential. Loving kindness has vision. It's not simply reporting on appearances. It is indeed attending to reality, but with a vision of the potential that is possible. May you be well and happy, even if right now you're not. May it be so because you have the potential. Loving kindness brings this to life in your imagination. However much we may long for another person's happiness, the like of which they've never seen before, sometimes people roll into themselves like a little bug, the bugs that curl over, a little sow bug. They roll into a contorted ball and suffer with very limited view and distorted emotions. Loving kindness imagines how people might unfold like a lotus and experience happiness that transcends anything we've experienced in the past. Loving kindness sees more than it witnesses. Compassion witnesses. Witnesses an individual in suffering, human or otherwise, and recognizing the suffering leads to yearning that they be free from suffering. And then there's a whole thing that he goes into about the nature of compassion. But my favorite thing about that passage I just read are these little words. Loving kindness sees, compassion witnesses. I think that's a really compelling contrast, because they both have to do with what might, how you are doing and looking at it. But loving kindness has this vision for being blooming like a flower, and compassion sees, like, sometimes you're sitting in the muck. Sometimes you've had the worst possible thing happen and you're full of unbearable pain. Compassion is about seeing the condition of another fully, being moved by the suffering that's there. And the moved part is an emotional thing. It implies an empathic understanding of what suffering is. And you might not understand their story. You might not understand how they got there, but you know that suffering sucks, right? And that we want to be free from it. And so there's this that helps motivate you to help them be relieved of it. So there is this reaching out that happens with compassion. May you be free from suffering. May I help you? It's like you're lending a hand when you engage in this. Compassion is powerful. It has a near enemy. The near enemy of compassion is pity, which is like, let's say, you could think of somebody seeing someone maybe on the street who's had a difficult time, is unhoused and doesn't have much, and feeling sorry for them, and that applies a power differential and looking down on somebody. That's different from being moved and wanting them to be free and wanting to help in that way. So pity has like this separation. Compassion has connection there. Compassion regards them as a fellow human, who's had like some bad luck on this path of life. And it puts you on the same level. Pity is looking down. Another near enemy of compassion is to be in the throes of overwhelming grief. And this is not to denigrate that state. Grief is real and grief is necessary. However, grieving over suffering is not the same as compassion. It's like it. The far enemy from compassion is cruelty, which should make sense, right? So if compassion is when someone's reaching out and wishing that they be free from pain and wishing that they not suffer, cruelty is the opposite of that. And you should be able to cultivate compassion to soften any sense of cruelty, to work against it as, again, thinking of the antidote. So whenever we bring up the far enemy, of a particular Brahmavihara, the Brahmavihara or the immeasurable is an antidote to that far enemy. Compassion is the antidote to cruelty. And if we work with what is some fundamental aspects of compassion, one of them is common humanity and recognizing that we are all in this together and we are all just trying to get through this thing called life without too much pain and maybe a little joy. That we're all part of this family on planet Earth in this predicament, and our specifics might be different, but we're all here. And when you recognize that, it works against othering. The compassion is a very good antidote to objectifying somebody. When you objectify them, it makes it easier to treat them as not human and to be cruel. Following? So compassion is powerful. It's also really intense. And when you're working with compassion, if you're cultivating compassion, and a lot of the practices are similar, but if you take something like metta that we were going through, the Pali word for compassion is karuna. That's all same in Sanskrit, actually. And when you're working with karuna, when you're working with compassion, you are really, what's the point I was going to make? Required. This is a term when I train other compassion teachers, I talk about. Compassion asks us to hold opposites. You have to feel like the sorrow. You might have to feel, witnessing someone suffering, and then the wish that they be free. And then part of compassion practices, when you think about the phrases that we use, they're parallel to the ones we use in metta, but it's about, may you be free from suffering. May you be free from pain. May you have peace and joy. So you're still wishing, there's a little bit of that, positivity at the end. May you not only be free of these things, but may you be happy. So you're envisioning this place that's better for them. And you're also witnessing and feeling moved by the difficulty. And so emotionally, compassion stretches us. That's why when you're working with this, you have to be very careful how you, I tell my students when we're picking a target or something to titrate it carefully. If like with these practices where we bring to mind a loved one who might be suffering, or, be careful what you bring up, because it could be, when you start going into that, it could get really, really intense. So you have to be able to see if that's something you can handle. That's why in any of this kind of work, it's very important to work on developing these qualities for yourself first. And self-compassion is absolutely essential to any other compassion practice. Because if compassion is about witnessing suffering and wishing that you be free from it, first you need to see it in yourself. And in the act of doing these practices, you might overstep what you can handle. And then you need to see that and pull back, say, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this right now. Let me stabilize, work on the breath. Let me pick an easier target to work with. So the ability to see how you're doing and monitoring that is super important for all of this work, especially the work with compassion. There's been a lot of research because of these classes like the one I helped develop at Stanford, these standardized programs. There's been a whole lot of research on the effects of compassion training on people. And we know not only does it enhance well-being, reduce anxiety and depression, it also increases helping behavior and decreases harmful regard to others. There's a lot of gifting is increased, altruistic tendencies are increased. Compassion training does seem to do what it's supposed to do. And if you've worked with any of these things yourself, you can report on the fact that when you're doing a lot of this, you just feel better. Right? You just feel like you meet other people where they are, you're nicer to them, you reach out, even, and when my students, when we're working with this piece of compassion training called common humanity, embracing, that just like me, just like you, everybody's just trying to get through this thing. You don't even have to know their story to know that. And if everybody could just do that, can you imagine how different the world would be? If we could see each other as people just trying to get through this thing called life, it would build connections. We need to be able to embrace each other as fellow humans if we're going to solve the problems of the world. And the only way, to solve the problems of the world, we have to at least be able to sit down and talk. And if you can see them as another individual rather than a member of this category, a stereotype or whatever, because we other them, it would change everything. So the more you can permeate those boundaries, the better. And compassion is the way. I mean, I'm a huge zealot for compassion. I'm not going to hide that. All right, so we've done loving kindness and compassion, and we've got 20 minutes. We have 2 more, so I better get going. The third one is one that's not as obvious to people. It's usually called sympathetic joy, but sometimes people refer to it as empathetic joy. The Sanskrit and I guess a Pali word is mudita. And this is a little bit more nuanced. It is about joy and happiness. However, it's reveling in the joy and happiness of others. Okay, and a particular angle on this is very useful, especially when you think about bringing it into life, is wishing that others flourish and have good fortune, that they have success. And so the far enemy of sympathetic joy are things like jealousy and envy, right? And it's interesting with things like joy and happiness, there's no law of conservation, of happiness in the world. Everybody could be happy and joyful. Can you imagine? So wishing unlimited joy for everybody is great. Sometimes we have trouble doing that for an adversary or someone we're in competition with. But the added element of may you have success, may you have good fortune is challenging. This is where this comes up. And I know in my own life, the times when I've really, because these are magic potions, right? The times when I've taken this practice and really focused on sympathetic joy in my practice is when there's someone who I feel either envious or jealous of. And I'm trying to get rid of that because that's a bad state to be in. And with all these things, by the way, there's a difference between wanting to change the way you feel about a situation and endorsing the situation, right? So let's say, go back to that example I gave about loving kindness with the situation where I was wronged. My wishing good things for the people involved did not mean I thought they were right. Developing compassion for them didn't mean that I was caving. In fact, compassion in particular, I love how Roshi Joan Halifax, who runs the Paya Zen Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and is also someone I regard as a very important teacher in my life. She says that, I'm going back to compassion for a minute, she says that compassion has strong back, soft front. And I love that embodied imagery. So with compassion, because you're witnessing the suffering and feeling moved by suffering, you're not running away from suffering. So that's the strong back. That's the courage. The soft front is you're opening, you're feeling moved by it. You're not building up armor, you're opening. And when you've been working repeatedly with being present with difficulty and not running, that's some traditions call this warrior training. So that situation with my work, where I talked about how in the end I left anyway, that was a strong back. Because I knew on an objective level there were things about that workplace setting that were not healthy, and I did not want to be in it anymore. However, I had softened and I did what they asked and I stayed with it, and so it could be handed off in a good fashion, but I was still not running. I mean, I was still not staying. So it's important to remember that all these things, they are qualities of heart. You are softening, you are connecting, and you can still be fiercely strong and courageous, not running away from pain. Okay, so I was talking about sympathetic joy, rejoicing in the good fortune of others. I'm going to read a passage from Sharon Salzberg. If you know Sharon, she's this amazing meditation teacher. She said, the third Brahmavihara, sympathetic joy, is the practice of actively taking delight in the happiness and success of others rather than feeling threatened or diminished, as if the happiness of another takes something away from us. In reality, she said, when I began practicing this way of seeing, I found that my normal conditioned reaction was to feel as though there was a limited amount of happiness in the world. And the more someone else had, the less there was going to be for me. But in reality, with strong sympathetic joy, we are able to feel happy when others are happy. We rejoice and take delight in their happiness. Longchenpa says, sympathetic joy is when another's development is as much a source of joy to us as our own. So that can be a tall order, but working toward that really throws the water on jealousy, throws the water on envy. So jealousy and envy are far enemies of sympathetic joy. What are the near enemies? Superficiality, like pretending that you want someone to be happy when you really don't, and a frivolousness. Those are both near enemies. Okay, so that brings us to equanimity, or upeksha. Equanimity is the most subtle and nuanced of the Brahmaviharas. And I can't remember where I read this or the teacher who told me this, but they had said that the reason why it's listed last is it's the most difficult to really get, and that working with the others kind of helps this naturally emerge. You could think of equanimity as a balanced receptivity. Not pulled one direction or the other. So relating to the world with a wide open, non-judgmental perspective, balanced and poised. It's not passive. It's open, balanced and poised and dynamic. So it's neither attraction nor aversion. And it's sometimes called like the foundation to bodhicitta, awakened mind. So open, balanced. The near enemy of this, because you're not being pulled in one direction or another, the near enemy is indifference or apathy, like you just don't care. That can masquerade as equanimity, but that's not what it is. It's not, you do care, but you're not showing a preference for one way or the other. So indifference, apathy, not caring, not blissed out, detachment either. Those are all near enemies. The far enemy is revulsion, intense attraction, and also the ones that I think of the most are things like bias and prejudice, because that is being pulled in a particular direction. So if it's sort of the antidote to bias or prejudice. It's a balanced orientation. There's love and compassion in it, but you don't get caught into the attraction or the immersion of that. You can love people and have compassion for them, and to kind of acknowledge that you might not be able to fix them. It's sort of like, I think of equanimity as like this ability to hold it all. It's quite an accomplishment. And there are times when, if you practice it enough, you can kind of visit that space, you know, and if any of you are interested in this in particular, my dear friend and fellow compassion teacher, spiritual friend of many years who actually lives in Berkeley, Margaret Cullen, wrote this book that just came out on equanimity. It's called Quiet Strength. It's a wonderful book. It's really accessible, and she has meditations in there. I strongly recommend it, and it's a lovely, lovely discussion of equanimity. It's also something that I think we need a lot in this world full of bias. Especially, I mean, there's always a lot of bias in the world. There's always a lot of prejudice in the world. It seems, however, that the climate that we're living in right now is stoking those fires a lot. So we need compassion, and we need equanimity, and we need love, and we need sympathetic joy. We need all these things. And you see how connected they are when you really start working with it, that compassion and love are kind of the undercurrent to all of it. But I thought it might be nice. I think we have a few minutes. You want to go through a very short equanimity meditation? Because that's the one where I think most people probably don't have experience with an explicit equanimity meditation. So I brought this one with me. So you can follow along. And we'll just do it for a few minutes, and then we'll make sure to leave a couple minutes for questions. So I'm going to go into it. And that's not loud. I'm going to have to do this. That's better. So just taking a minute to find a posture, stabilizing the body, finding a way to sit that you can sit comfortably without too much movement. And maybe taking a couple slow, deep cleansing breaths, where you draw the air deep into your chest and belly, letting your body expand with that in-breath, filling the vessel. Thinking of that deep in-breath as an opening. And then slowly releasing that, taking your time with the out-breath. Incrementally letting it go, such that you're just relaxing that in-breath, releasing the in-breath, letting your weight settle into your seat. Maybe a couple more of those, a slow, deep in-breath, feeling the space created as you open. And the out-breath, a gradual letting go, a releasing. And then letting go of that deliberate breathing. And allowing the body to just breathe the way it knows how to do. As you sit comfortably, just very lightly attending to where you notice the filling of the breath in the body. Maybe it's a gentle rising and falling of your chest and belly. Maybe it's the feeling of the air moving in and out through your nose and mouth. Whatever stands out to you, lightly resting your awareness on that sensation. And as you sit, noticing your breath, see if you can find the spacious place of ease between the breaths, this natural moment of balance there that happens all by itself. And let that place be the focus of your practice, that space between expansion and contraction, between rising and falling, between in and out. Reminding yourself of a wish to be balanced, to find equanimity. Offering yourself silently in your mind these phrases. May I be open, balanced, and at peace. May my heart be at rest and balanced in the midst of all things. Some version of that. May I be open, balanced, and at peace. May my heart be at rest and balanced in the midst of all things. Sensing into a point of balance inside amidst all the changes dynamically that happen inside you in this crazy world. And try on these phrases, and I'll give you another set of phrases. These are really reinforce a sense of how all things arise and pass. So here they are. Things are just as they are. All things are impermanent. Feelings will arise and they will pass. I am safe in this moment. Say that again. Things are just as they are. All things are impermanent. Feelings will arise and they will pass. I am safe in this moment. Rest in knowing that you are safe. Things arise and they pass. I am safe in this moment. Finishing with these two phrases. May I bring compassion and equanimity to the events of the world. May I find balance and peace. I'll add the dedication. May all beings be free and happy, free from suffering and its causes. May they have peace and joy. So we have time for a couple questions if anybody has any questions or reflections. Any reflections on the practice? That was an abbreviated equanimity meditation. A lot of the language I borrowed from some meditations that the book that Margaret Cullen has. She also admits to borrowing some from Jack Kornfield. We all borrow everybody's. And they come from thousands of years ago too. Any comments? Yeah. And what's your name?
Oh, thanks, Bert.
Bert. Yes, I know I've seen you before. Yeah.
So you brought up with the loving kindness, you brought up the example of like the work example,
Yeah.
and then how that was challenging because it was, there was a kind of conflicting response that had been
Yeah.
created. So like what if it was a situation where because there was, I guess it was sort of like you needed to like maintain like the normalcy in that situation. I mean, what if it's a such a scenario where, like, let's say you're the one trying to break apart from some like previous relation, and so you might have people like say stalking you with a motive. Then it becomes difficult to confer loving kindness or positivity to that relation because then that starts to reinforce what you're trying to break away from.
Right. So you bring up a really important point. I don't know if everybody online could hear what Bert said, but it sounded like you brought up like a potentially dangerous situation that someone was in.
It's not dangerous. I mean, yeah, it's not dangerous, but
Or you're
like it's a
trying to
personal
leave it.
situation. But it's like it's not dangerous, but it's like it's just annoying because there's like a motive. It's like, for example, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't get anything more.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is useful that you said that because there's also the issue of if there's a situation in which you're not safe. And that's really has to be treated a little bit differently because you might need to get out of it. And there's still room for loving kindness and compassion practice that can make the experience easier for you, right? But you have to titrate it when there's things like trauma and stuff. It's not appropriate to try to work with the target that way if you're dealing with trauma. But you're not talking about a traumatic situation. You're talking about a really difficult situation that you just want to extract yourself from. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because for example,
Yeah.
I'll give slightly more details. It's like, let's say there are some people you grow up around, and then they're sort of entitled, and they sort of like they always stuck together. They didn't really branch out because in their view, they might have had their own views, but from the outside in, it seems kind of obvious that it's like, oh, because those people are sort of their own bubble, they grew up entitled. So that I'm in the situation where, I mean, you want to treat society as flat, but in effect, I'm able to upgrade my entire life.
Yeah. So
So-
this is really important.
This
Okay.
sort of
All right.
is the conflict,
So
right?
it's a conflict and there, whatever the specifics are, there's a situation where you don't feel connected to them anymore or their belief system, and you're in a different situation. You feel like you've improved and maybe they haven't. Without sounding
So, once you get into the mindset of framing like, oh, well, I can do better, or like what I have is better or something, then that creates ego conflict.
right. And quite apart from any further specifics, I would argue that it's equally important to do the practices in that situation. And because and this is where I say, it's not, there's situations that happen and there's how you relate to it, right? So especially when, like a lot of people talk about like outgrowing people or, like like old people who are in your life for a while back and I'm so different from them now and I don't see the things the way they did. The value of doing, and I'm going to say compassion practice here, is that it helps you realize that you might not agree with them. You might not value the same things that they value. And it might be important for you to live your life differently now. That all can be true. And they're just trying to get through life. They're on planet Earth. They don't want to suffer and they want to have joy. Even if you think they're behaving in ways that make it so that they want to suffer. And you have your own situation. It helps prevent against stereotyping, they're all this way, othering, and de-individuation, which are all set up a pathway for cruelty or being unkind.
Yeah, so I figure like that's sort of like I just find it that's sort of what you described. It naturally evolves
Yeah.
once you start tipping the balance, in one direction. And it's like, for example, I would try to apply Buddha's concept in like compassion.
Yeah.
But then I found myself sort of like doing a backhanded compassion, if that
Right.
makes
So
sense. I was like,
then I love if you notice that happening, break it out and do it for everybody. Okay, that helps. And another thing that I love, and I see we're going over, so I'll finish answering this. One thing that one of my another dear teacher, Pema Chodron, talks about a lot is when things like that are difficult or challenging like that come up during practice or just walking around in life. Fold that in. I'm now going to do compassion practice for everybody who finds himself doing backhanded compassion. You can just let go of the specifics and send love and concern and empathic understanding to all of that. And like I understand that part of myself that's doing that. You know, I see my wish is this, but I'm getting involved in this kind of thing. So it's almost like it's all at a level bigger than the details, if that makes any sense. You know, and all it takes is something like, you know, a natural disaster to suddenly erode all the differences among us. There's a humility. We're trying to take care of staying alive. And suddenly all the BS that separates us, the petty concerns that make us different, mean nothing. And if you remember, a piece that I left out of all of this is impermanence. And if you remember that we're all going to die and we don't know when it's going to happen, would it be great to just all get along? And that doesn't mean we're going to live in this utopian, we're so far from utopia, that's not a risk, society. But if we can remember that everybody's on this path together, we have very different stories, we might have very different beliefs, it makes all the getting along easier, especially with getting along, like, you know, you talk about people who you might have been friends with or whatever previous in your life, and it's different now. But you might still need to engage. You know, they might become part of your world and you don't want to seem arrogant, you know, and their concerns matter too, you know, and not to trivialize it. And you can be and you can develop however you want to be, and you can still be kind and connected to what they're going through. I think it really has to do with how we relate to one another as human beings. And you know, I hope that makes some sense, Bert. Is it?
And I get it. It's my situation is just complex. For example, it's like I mentioned the entitled part. It's like, well, it's like I'm like starting this company,
Yeah.
and so these people are trying to latch on, but it's like there are some of them already multimillionaires. They're just like greedy, right? It's
Right.
like, and also the company has nothing to do with them. Even it's sort of like it's. I just don't
You
want to be around those
hear
people.
what they have to say, and you have your boundaries, because this is where the self-compassion comes in. This is not about not having boundaries.
But it's the sort of people. It is a sort. I know. It's the sort of people who don't understand themselves.
Yeah, and you can have compassion for the fact that they don't get it. And that's what I love about it. Just throw it at everything. Okay. Thank you all. It's been great. Thanks, folks. Were there any questions? I know we're kind of over anything. I'm looking at the screen. Anything I can help you with? Are we good? All right. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you. Thanks to the Institute. Thanks to Alaya for doing the tech. And all of you folks, have a great evening. It's still light outside, and that always makes me happy. I like summer. All right.